March 1st, 1896. The sun rose over thousands of bodies. Europeans were scattered across the fields of Adwa. Italian soldiers who only hours before had considered themselves superior now lay defeated by those they had called savages. But how? At just 17 years old over the years, he achieved what no one else had. Did the African leader succeed? How did he transform tribal warriors into a war machine capable of humiliating one of Europe's great powers? His name was Menelik II. And this is the story of how one man saved an entire civilization on the brink of extinction, how Africa proved it was never inferior, and how the world tried to erase that story from history books. You're about to discover the truth they don't want you to know. The truth about the day Africa said no to European imperialism and won. To understand the magnitude of what Menelik did, you need to picture Africa in 1889. Imagine an entire continent being devoured like a piece of meat by hungry lions. France had taken the West. Britain dominated the South and parts of the East. Germany was sinking its claws into the center. Portugal and Spain fought over the leftovers. This is what Europeans cynically called the scramble for Africa. In 1884, in Berlin, men in suits decided the fate of 400 million Africans, without consulting a single African. They literally drew lines on maps like children dividing up a toy. The numbers are terrifying. In 1870, only 10% of Africa was under European control. By 1900, that number had risen to 90%. 90% of an entire continent enslaved. But there was one exception, a kingdom in the Ethiopian highlands that refused to bow. A young emperor who looked at the invaders and said, "Not today." Not ever. His name was Salamariam, but the world would come to know him as Menelik II, and he was about to rewrite history. On August 17, 1844, in the highlands of Shua, a boy was born who would change the course of African history. But Salamariam wasn't born an emperor. He was born into a land torn apart by civil wars. By the 1850s, Ethiopia was a fractured kingdom. Warlords fought each other while the people suffered. Young Sala grew up watching his land bleed from internal strife. By age 10, he was already training with swords. By 14, he commanded his first men. By 17, he had conquered his first territories. But what made him special wasn't just his military talent. It was his obsession with knowledge. He learned Italian, French, and English. He studied European maps and military tactics. While other African leaders knew little of the outside world, Menelik devoured it. Imagine it. An African youth in 1860, speaking 4 languages, understanding international politics, studying European military strategy. He knew that to defeat his enemy, he had to know him better than the enemy knew himself. In 1865, at 21, Salamariam became king of Shewa. That was only the beginning. He had a plan that would take decades to fulfill, a plan not only to save Ethiopia but to preserve African dignity itself. He knew the Europeans were coming, and when they arrived, he would be ready. The next 20 years were a masterclass in empire building. Menelik didn't just conquer, he transformed. Each victory was calculated, every alliance strategic. He modernized Ethiopia's army in revolutionary ways. While other African leaders fought with spears and shields, Menelik imported modern rifles. But here's the genius. He didn't just buy weapons. He brought in European technicians to teach Ethiopians how to make their own ammunition. He built an independent arms industry. Do you realize how brilliant that was? He used European technology against the Europeans themselves. By 1889, the Ethiopian army had 100,000 trained men, 82,000 modern rifles, and 40 cannons, numbers rivaling any European army of the time. But Menelik was more than a general. He was a visionary. He built roads, modernized agriculture, and created a postal system. He was preparing his country for the 20th century. In 1889, he finally became Emperor of Ethiopia, Menelik II, the man who unified a fragmented kingdom into a regional power. But his greatest test was yet to come. That same year, Italy turned its eyes toward East Africa and decided it wanted its share of the continent. They thought Ethiopia would be easy prey. They had no idea what awaited them. Italy, in 1890, was a newly unified European power desperate to prove its worth among the imperial elite. They looked toward East Africa and saw an opportunity. The Italian army was modern, well-equipped, and trained in the finest European academies. They had heavy artillery, repeating rifles, and telegraphic communications. General Baratieri, commander of the Italian forces, was a veteran of European wars. He looked at the Africans as minor obstacles on Italy's road to glory. "Savages with spears," he said. "Ah, European arrogance." They had no idea they were about to face one of the most brilliant military minds of the 19th century. In East Africa, 17,000 European soldiers, 10,000 colonial troops, and endless supplies from the metropolis stood ready. On paper, they were invincible. But there was one problem, one the Italians' arrogance blinded them to. On the other side, on the mountain slopes, Menelik II was watching, planning, preparing. The greatest military surprise of the 19th century. He knew the Italians were coming, and when they did, he would turn his homeland into a deadly trap. May 2nd, 1889. The Treaty of Wuchale was signed between Italy and Ethiopia. On paper, it looked like a treaty of peace and friendship. In reality, it was a trap. Here's where history takes a dark turn. The treaty was written in two languages, Amharic and Italian, but there were crucial differences between the two versions. In the Ethiopian version, Article 17 stated that Ethiopia could use Italian diplomatic services. In the Italian version, it said Ethiopia must only use Italian diplomatic services. One word, just one word, turned an option into enslavement. The Italians had literally forged a treaty to turn Ethiopia into a protectorate. They presented their falsified version to other European powers as proof that Ethiopia was Italian territory. When Menelik discovered the betrayal in 1893, he was furious. But it wasn't blind rage. It was cold, calculated determination. He knew war was inevitable. In 1895, he officially denounced the Treaty of Wuchale. His message to Italy was clear: come and claim our land, if you can. And they came. Oh, they came indeed. What followed was the largest military mobilization in African history. Menelik didn't just call up his troops. He summoned an entire nation. Messengers spread across the empire carrying a single message: Africa is under attack. Come and defend our land, our dignity, our future. The response was overwhelming. 196,000 men answered the call. Warriors from every tribe, every region. Christians, Muslims, animists, all united against a common invader. But Menelik was more than a charismatic leader. He was a strategist. He organized his army like a modern machine. Each region brought its strengths, some with rifles, others with spears, others on horseback. And here's what's truly astonishing: the logistics. Moving 196,000 men through mountains, feeding them, arming them, coordinating them. European generals took months to mobilize smaller armies. Menelik did it in weeks, because this wasn't just an army moving. It was an entire civilization rising to defend its existence. By December 1895, the largest army Africa had ever seen was marching toward destiny. Neither the Italians nor their allies had any idea what was coming. March 1st, 1896, 5:30 a.m., the hills of Adwa. Two worlds were about to collide. On the Italian side, 17,000 men confident in European superiority. On the Ethiopian side, 100,000 warriors fighting for the survival of their civilization. General Baratieri had completely underestimated his enemy. He thought he was fighting disorganized tribes. In reality, he was marching straight into one of the most brilliantly planned traps in military history. Menelik had positioned his troops with genius precision, using the mountainous terrain as a weapon. The Italians were funneled into valleys where their artillery was useless, and Ethiopia's superior numbers became devastating. At 6 a.m., the battle began. What was meant to be a simple cleanup operation turned into Europe's worst military nightmare in Africa. By 8 a.m., all hell had broken loose at Adwa. Ethiopian warriors fought with a ferocity that stunned the Europeans. They weren't just soldiers. They were men defending their families, their land, their dignity. The result was catastrophic for Italy. 7,000 dead, 10,000 wounded, 3,000 captured. More than half of the Italian army was annihilated. It was the greatest European military defeat ever suffered in Africa. By 2 p.m., General Baratieri ordered a retreat. No, not a retreat. A panic. Men fled in terror, realizing they were not superior in any way. Menelik II had achieved the impossible. He had defeated a European power in open battle, and more importantly, he had saved African dignity. News of the Battle of Adwa shocked the world. Newspapers from London to St. Petersburg blared the headlines, "Africans defeat a European army." In Paris, intellectuals debated whether their theories of racial superiority had been wrong all along. In London, the British government began re-evaluating its African strategies. In Rome, the Italian government collapsed, but the deepest impact was felt across Africa. For the first time in decades, Africans everywhere felt something they had long lost: hope. From Morocco to Cape Town, resistance movements began to rise. African leaders who had resigned themselves to European domination began to dream again of independence. Ethiopia became the only independent African nation for over 40 years, until the 1960s. It stood alone, a beacon of freedom on a colonized continent. Menelik ruled until 1913, modernizing Ethiopia, building railroads, schools, and hospitals. He proved that Africa could be both independent and prosperous. Today, when you see the Ethiopian flag, green, yellow, and red, you are looking at the colors that never bowed to imperialism, the colors of African resistance. Menelik didn't just save Ethiopia, he saved the idea that Africa could be free. Those colors became the symbol of Pan-Africanism. Dozens of African countries adopted them in their flags. But here lies the tragedy. Why isn't this story taught in schools? Why is one of the greatest military achievements in modern history ignored? Why isn't Menelik II celebrated like Napoleon or Alexander the Great? Because the myth of African inferiority is essential to justifying centuries of exploitation. To acknowledge Menelik's victory is to admit that Africa has always been capable of greatness. So the next time someone speaks of civilization and superiority, remember March 1st, 1896. The day a young Africa proved that courage, strategy, and determination have no color. Remember Menelik II, the man who saved the dignity of an entire continent. And if this story impressed you, it impressed me, too. Leave a like, subscribe, and share this video, because stories like this must be told and never forgotten.